Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, I really try not to rant on this channel. I really try. But every once in a while, something happens in just general life that, well, I wouldn't say gets me upset, but I guess the best way to put it would be if you know the Odyssey, it's where Odysseus has to beat down the rising thumos in his chest. It's something passionate that rises up within me. And this, of course, has to do this week with the destruction of the traditional idea of hero and really the presentation of that to just the next generation. So I guess I'll take a step back and start here. So I was at someone else's house over the last week. We had a game night and they had a television on in the background and there was a normal broadcast news station of some kind talking, I don't even know which. And there was a bunch of talking heads and they were going on about how conservative political parties, and they included, of course, the Republican Party in this, but they were talking about more all over the world, not just America, but they were saying how the normal, everyday people were getting sick and tired of what these conservative parties, like the Republican Party, were doing. They don't want to actually go that far right in their estimation. They just want to be fiscally conservative. They don't want to be actually socially conservative. This is what they were saying that the normal people want. And that these conservative parties, again, like the Republican Party, need to move away from these culture war issues because it's costing them dearly and they're going to lose the next set of elections, again, not just in America, but around the world. And I just thought to myself, okay, either you people are so ignorant about what normal people want that you have no clue, or you're simply gaslighting everyone. And I would probably choose the second. Because this is what left-leaning parties have been doing for 50, 60 years minimum now. When they get into power, they take a mile. And then when they lose power and the more conservative parties get into power and they take a couple of inches, they say, okay, that's far enough. You can't take it all. That's far enough for you to go. And that's why, over the last little while, when, again, the liberal parties get into power, they take a mile, and the conservative parties get into power, they take a couple of inches back. And that's it. And they stop them there, saying, don't be greedy. You can't put us any farther back than that. And the entire thing is gaslighting, saying, yeah, you don't want to do that. No, the normal people don't want that. And this is what I saw on that television screen while I was trying to play this game. And again, these talking heads, who were, some of them supposedly conservative, were going on about this, of how we had to move away from these culture war issues because the normal person was getting sick of it. And I'm going to offer this counterpoint as someone who is a conservative-minded people. We are not getting sick of these culture war issues. Honestly, we're just getting started. And while I may hear the thoughts of some of you in the background thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm kind of getting sick of these culture war issues right now, again, I would argue with you and say that you are not. Why? Because winning in the culture war and bringing things back to more sane proportions, and again, that's the conservative side right now, because if you're anything even slightly right of Mao Zedong, you're considered right-wing right now. So if you're trying to bring some sanity back to the world, your country, anything, what does that look like? Well, that looks like you being happy, healthy, productive, and well-adjusted. And I would say that that is what you and I want. Because the other side, they want you isolated, miserable, and alone. And that's not just me saying this. You can go back to the literature of the left, their gurus over the last 75 years. Go back to Saul Alinsky and read his books. Go back to Robert Creamer from the 80s, and he was their new guru at that time. And go back to his books. This is what he exactly says. He says, you don't try to defeat conservatives. You make them feel isolated, miserable, and alone. So the way that we win, and at the same time the way that we fight, is by being happy, well-adjusted, productive, and well-adjusted. And again, I would argue that that is what everyone who listens to my voice actually wants. And, oh, by the way, just to let you know, the way that I become healthy and productive and feel good about what I'm doing, I create graphic novels. So there is a link in the description for my 3 graphic novels and on the pinned comment, my 2 superhero graphic novels, The Valiant Heroes and Thomas Valiant. You can get both of them at the Indiegogo page for The Valiant Heroes, and my return to form for low fantasy, which is Crom the Destroyer. These are stories that focus on things like heroism, virtue, honor, and you're looking at some of the beautiful art from those graphic novels in the background. So if any of that sounds or looks appealing to you at all, click on those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. But back to my topic. I guess I should say back to my rant. And the thing is, you see, the reason why they're telling us, no, slow down, you don't want to go in that direction, is because the sane side of the aisle is starting to win some culture war battles. We're starting to gain some ground. And there were a couple of news stories this week that actually show that we're starting to gain some ground. And I'm going to go over those really briefly and tie that into what I'm talking about. One that you've probably seen is, what's his name? Bob Iger, the head of Disney, actually coming out and saying, we're going to have to move away from these agenda-driven stories and entertainment. We're going to have to go back to the basics of just making good entertainment. And he literally came out with a statement and said this. Now, here's the thing about that. That sounds like, first of all, a good thing. Secondly, I'll have to note that I don't think any of this would have come about unless Florida did what it did and started to push back, especially within the school systems. And then, of course, Disney stepped in and tried to reverse the entire thing. And then Florida said, well, let's look at taking a couple of things, special privileges away from the Disney company because they're interfering in politics, which was a good thing to happen. Yeah, sure, it's great. But again, back to this statement by Bob Iger. There are several problems with it that we'll have to note, and they are the following. Number one, if they're just words and there's no action behind it, then it might as well be written on toilet paper. Number two, since the entire system right now and the vast majority of the people working for companies like Disney, and again, all the companies that Disney owns like Marvel, since they're far left ideologues, even if he does put in some action, are the actual employees going to follow through with it? That's a good question. Number three, if he does implement this and some of the employees do start to carry out his orders in the company, do the far left ideologues that are in the company try to destroy everything as they're pushed out? Because again, they tried to do that with Twitter, so we do have some precedent for them doing that. And number four, even if they were to do a heel turn just today, would anybody go back to Disney? Would anybody go back to Marvel? And that's today. And I would say, again, even if they implement some of these actions, they're going to have to do them extremely slowly, just so they can bypass the ideologues that make up all of their, at the very least, higher level management right now and work around them so they don't destroy everything. So if they did do a complete 180, it would take 2 to 5 years minimum. And if no one is willing to go back to them now, how much do you think people are going to be willing to go back to them 2, 5, maybe even more years from now? I doubt it's going to be enough. Maybe I'll be wrong. But at the very least, that statement itself from the head of Disney was a win. It is a win for people who are looking for good entertainment. And again, that's part of being happy and healthy. Now let's move on to news story number 2 that I came across over the last week. This is a news story about Ibram X. Kendi. Now, if you don't know who Ibram X. Kendi is, he literally wrote the book on anti-racism and made statements like the only cure for past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only cure for present discrimination is future discrimination. So basically, he's saying that anti-racism does include, now and in the future, putting some sections of people under the heel of others. And those people under the heel would be whitey this time. Although that is quickly expanding to white and Asian people. But he's been getting some pushback, especially because one of the people running for the head of the Republican Party right now, I can't remember his first name, is it Vivek Ramaswamy, has come out and said that Ibram X. Kendi and people like him are the equivalent of today's grand wizards of the and I'll probably have to use a lot of euphemisms with this video. Let's just say the Triple K. Oh, by the way, YouTube, Triple K is a piece of farm machinery. That's all it is. For everyone else, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Now, this is causing a lot of problems for Kindy, and you have the universities that he works for. I think it's Boston College, who gave him like $60,000 in order to study this anti-racism, and he hasn't produced anything for them. And they're going, you're not doing any research. What's going on here? And the previous university that paid him is doing the same thing, but he's swimming in money. He was making, I think it was $10,000 per speaking event. But anyway, so he is getting pushed back on. And there are a number of things which I found out last year, but there wasn't enough to do a video on. But I'll give it to you right now, that last year he began, it was basically a think tank that was going to join itself to other entertainment producers and actually start churning out what he called anti-racism entertainment. He had already taken his book called Anti-Racism and turned it into a children's book, a children's picture book, by the way. That's how early they wanted to indoctrinate little children. And they wanted to move on, first of all, to take that book itself, the children's book, and turn it into a children's television series on Netflix. And he had a tentative deal to do it there. And also he wanted to produce comics and graphic novels with other companies. And of course, you know exactly what kind of material we're going to come out of that. Now, most of these things, as I understand it, as I follow it, have already gone by the wayside just because everybody's in desperate straits for money right now. They can't back things like they used to. So you have those things being shut down. And again, those things being shut down, and on top of that, Kindy being pointed out as someone who is encouraging racial division rather than discouraging it, that counts as a win. Story number 3 from this week is a little bit connected to Kindy because it's someone who himself is a little bit connected to Kindy, and that would be Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now again, Ta-Nehisi Coates, if you don't know, just from the entertainment perspective, he wrote a Black Panther story arc, or a bunch of story arcs, which again contain all of this idea of anti-racism. He's also very much a backer of the 1619 Project, that idea that America is built on slavery, and therefore, of course, the slaves own America because they built it. And from that, he also jumps into slave reparations, and he's talked about this numerous times, even in front of Congress, along with Danny Glover at the time. And he still has speaking engagements. I think in October he has like 5 or 6 of them coming up, talking about slave reparations, all this kind of thing. But yeah, he writes books that get into schools, and he writes graphic novels. Basically, he wrote comics, again, being first of all Black Panther and then Captain America, which he completely destroyed anything that was left of that character and the supporting identity of that character, which was Steve Rogers. And the underlying tone of those stories was all of this hatred of America, because he has stated his hatred of America many times. And the reason why Ta-Nehisi Coates is in the news is because one of his early books, not a graphic novel, but an actual book called, I think it's Between the World and Me, was being taught in a South Carolina high school, and the high school students, according to a new law that just came onto the books in 2023 in South Carolina, brought this to their parents. Their parents brought it to the school board, and they said, according to this new law, you're making our children feel discriminated against because of their skin color by making them read this Ta-Nehisi Coates book. And that teacher, of course, got themselves into a lot of hot water. Now, I haven't heard anything from Coates at all that I looked about this subject. But again, I think that news story counts as a win in our category of trying to bring back sanity. And why are all these things a win? Well, you'll notice that there is, in each of these stories, a similar connection. And that connection is the fact that people are starting to fight back for their children, especially in public school settings. Again, the thing with Disney wouldn't have happened if Disney didn't push back on Florida actually implementing laws to protect children. Ibram X. Kendi was already gearing up a machine so that he could sell this idea of so-called anti-racism to young children through television and through comics and graphic novels. And Ta-Nehisi Coates gets into trouble because new laws were passed in South Carolina saying that his book, in the context of a high school setting, can be considered racial discrimination. And you may not see that as a big win, but I've been covering the entertainment section, especially as it pertains to things like comics and graphic novels, and sometimes YA novels, because they throw that right in there with the rest of them, over the last 5-6 years now. And I could tell you right now, right here, that this was their plan all along. I did a video over 5 years ago. It was from one of the Comic-Cons, and they had the Vice President of Content and Character Development from Marvel Comics, Sana Amanat, talking about comics. And one of the questions given to her was, is this promotion of these quote-unquote progressive ideas in comics actually hurting comics because they're not selling well? And specifically, they were talking about America Chavez. Now, America Chavez, if you don't know, is a comic and now several graphic novels that is just heavy progressive propaganda, page after page after page. And she said at that time, no, it doesn't matter that books like this don't sell well. And she was saying don't sell well as floppies, that is to say, as comics. Why? She specifically answered and said, because they will move on to take this and put it into a trade paperback and sell it to who? Well, to libraries and library associations. And that would include, of course, public school library, because they want these things on the shelf right next to Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, because they give the exact same message. Further to that, I did another video about 3 years ago, might have been 2.5, about Gene Yang's book, Superman Smashes the Klan. And that one makes leftists' head explode. They keep on trying to browbeat me in some way by twisting around what I say in that video to try and make me take it down. I ain't taking it down. The story in that book was a retelling of a radio serial for Superman, which came out, I think it was 1948, 1949, and it was titled, I think, Superman versus the Clan of the Fiery Cross. So you get the gist of what they're trying to do with that story. And everybody on the other side, the far left progressive side, were saying, no, he's just telling and retelling this old story. Isn't that a good thing? That he's retelling a story where a substitute for the Klan is actually getting destroyed? Well, yeah, but here's the thing. The way that Gene Yang brings this story forward in the very specific time and place that he does it, and the very specific lines that you can see him accenting throughout the story, because yes, I read the book. Yes, I listened to the radio play. If you do all of that, you can see that what he's trying to do is connect the Clan of the Fiery Cross from those books to modern day Republicans and their political platform. Which is quite ironic because, of course, the Klan, the original one, is a democratic organized institution and used its power to promote the Democratic Party, and yet he's trying to connect these Democratic Party evils of the past and say they're all Republican now. But the reason why he's trying to do this is because he wants to equate those two things, i.e. the Klan, with Republicans, in the minds of who? In the minds of school children. Now, before I get there, I'll have to say that I did another video after I did that one. It was probably about 6 months later, where all of my suspicions about what I had said in that original video were completely justified when Gene Yang went on a screed on Twitter talking about the fact that what he had written for Superman, that one, and what he was then presently doing, which was trying to change the tagline of Superman from truth, justice, and the American way to truth, justice, and tolerance. He basically said that tolerance is defined as, and then he gives a definition, which is the definition of progressivism, which isn't the actual definition of tolerance, but he defines tolerance as progressivism. And then he says, you're either progressive or you're for blood and soil. Now, blood and soil is an old catchphrase from 1930s militaristic Germans. So he's saying, because he tries to be light-handed in the way that he does things, he's saying either you're progressive and you accept progressivism and all that comes with it, or you're part of the SS. And the reason I'm going over all of this was because while he was saying this and doing this and writing these things for DC Comics, he was the head of an organization that had as its highest purpose getting graphic novels into the school system. And these are the kinds of graphic novels and stories that he was trying to get into the school system. Again, he was the head of the organization, appointed head at that time, if I remember correctly. And these are just the two most notable stories that I can remember that I covered. I'm sure there are plenty that I am not even aware of. This is what they've been trying to do in the large comic companies, certainly of Marvel and DC. They've been trying to take these quote-unquote progressive comics and resell them to libraries, schools, library associations, so their progressive message gets carried straight on into the school system and supplants, dare I say, indoctrinates the children into this progressive mindset, supporting, of course, what they're being told from the teachers. Now, I'm sure there might be at least one or two people who are saying, oh, you're just blowing this all out of proportion. And to that, I would say there's another news story that came out in the last couple of weeks. I just heard about it in the last week. It was, I think, a couple of weeks ago, if not more. And it's from Canada. And it's the fact that the capital province of Canada, that is to say where the capital of Canada is in that province, has decided to remove every book from public libraries, including school libraries, that has been published prior to 2008. Why? Well, of course, because old books are not, quote-unquote, progressive enough. And when I heard that, that was the trigger for why I need to rant about this. It's because my literal reaction to this, to the person who told me this, and then I had to go and confirm this was actually true, was to say, what about Robin Hood? What about the Iliad, the Odyssey? What about Virgil? What about Shakespeare? Lord of the Rings? Tarzan? What about all of these great books? The books that used to be the boy adventure stories before we had comics. And the great works of literature from Western civilization. What about all of those books? And yeah, guess what? All of those books, they're gone. Those books which are the heart of teaching young people about what true heroism is. And someone, again, might be saying, well, I'm just trying to do what the other side is doing. Isn't that the exact same thing, me trying to indoctrinate them? No, it isn't. Why? Because they're trying to literally indoctrinate children into a political ideology. An ideology itself that's based on ideological principles that say there is no truth. Everything's relative. I'm talking about true heroism. Heroism comes from virtue. Virtue cannot begin to grow within a person without right reason. Right reason is your reason in accord with reality. It is, therefore, heroism is an expression of what is real, not what I want to teach these children. It's an expression of the reality around us and the reality of human existence and how those two things interact and how we as human beings live out our lives according to that reality. And again, you might be saying to yourself, well, it's just Canada. Who cares? Or it's just one part of Canada. Who cares? Well, first of all, I would say that since I've done some research into the way this system of education works in Canada, I can tell you right now that the smaller provinces of Canada just copy what the larger provinces usually do for their education systems. So the rest of them are most probably going to adopt this, or at the very least, the rest of the smaller ones are going to probably adopt this within the near future. And secondly, I would say the following. Now, you might call me crazy for saying the following, but I'm going to tell you that when I took political science and political theory back in the 1990s, it was something, of course, that I studied intently. After my history degree, I went into political science and then went into a master's of political science. But at that time, it was accepted because, of course, we had to study other things than just political theory. We had to study public relations, international political theory, all these kinds of things. It was accepted by more than just one or two professors at that time when I was studying that the following was the basic reason why some of the things pop up in Canada that they would see over and over again. It was the fact that international organizations would use Canada as a testing ground for ideas that they wanted to insert into America, because Canada was similar enough geographically, linguistically, everything else, so that if it worked in Canada, then they would move on to the more liberal states within the US and try there. And again, call me crazy if you want, but this was an accepted principle of studying international organizations and their impact on North America back in the 1990s. And I suppose I should just throw in the news story over the last week about New York trying to get rid of statues of George Washington. If they're going to get rid of all historical figures in public squares, what do you think they're going to do within the systems, like the school systems, that they thoroughly control? You don't think they're going to do some book burning of their own? Yeah, unless we keep on pushing back in this sector or support the people who have children to push back in this sector, this battleground is going to be lost. And this is the major battleground for these people. Again, going over those stories, those statements from people like Sana Amanat, Jean Yang, and the rest. And, oh, by the way, I just happened to come across, because someone sent it to me, a approved reading list for high schoolers within one of the provinces of Canada. And it looks exactly like you think it would. Progressivism just dripping all over everything. And this brings me right back to where I was at the first. This brings me back to the point of, yeah, we're not getting sick of these culture war issues. We're just getting started. And it brings me back to the point of, you fight by being happy and healthy and productive and well-adjusted. Because, of course, the reason why these ideologues are going after the schools is because they want the next generation to be miserable, isolated, and alone. That's what their ideology leads to. And at the very least, the absolute minimum, we should be able to counter that by giving, not just to our children, but really to all children, heroic stories. Stories like Robin Hood, like Lord of the Rings, like the Odyssey, like Tarzan. Those are stories not just of pure entertainment, but stories that were constructed well. And as such, they're a reflection of reality that show those children that such ways of acting, of being heroic, not only make you feel good, but lead you to those places of happiness, healthiness, productivity, well-adjustment, because in the end, they defeat this progressive onslaught of misery by showing them that heroism is indeed real. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, the links are in the description for my 3 graphic novels and on the pinned comment. The Valiant Heroes, Thomas Valiant, and Crom the Destroyer. Stories about true heroes that are meant to be entertaining and fun. So if that sounds appealing to you at all, click on those links in the description and go on over and get yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.